This book was generated using Speakter's AI voices. You can create human-like voiceovers in over 50 languages.
Jonathan Harker, a young English solicitor, embarked on a journey that would alter the course of his life. His destination was Transylvania, where an enigmatic nobleman named Count Dracula awaited his arrival to discuss the purchase of property in London. The rhythmic clatter of train wheels against iron tracks lulled Harker into a trance-like state as he watched the familiar cityscape of Budapest fade into the distance. Rolling hills and dense forests gradually replaced the urban sprawl, their untamed beauty both alluring and unsettling. With each passing mile, civilization seemed to retreat, giving way to a wilderness that whispered of ancient secrets and forgotten lore. Villages nestled in secluded valleys appeared like islands in a sea of green, their inhabitants peering at the passing train with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. Harker couldn't shake the feeling that their wary gazes held a warning he couldn't quite decipher. As dusk fell, the train pulled into Bistritz, the final stop before Harker's ultimate destination. The air hung heavy with an inexplicable tension, as if the very atmosphere was holding its breath in anticipation of something ominous. Hushed whispers followed him as he made his way to a small inn, the floorboards creaking beneath his feet like old bones. That evening, as Harker sat at his desk, penning notes about his journey, a soft knock at the door made him jump. His heart raced as he opened it, revealing the innkeeper's wife. Her eyes were wide with fear, her voice barely audible as she pleaded, "Please, sir, reconsider your journey to the castle." Before Harker could respond, she pressed a small crucifix into his hand. The cool metal against his skin sent a shiver down his spine, its weight far greater than its size suggested. Harker's rational mind dismissed her fears as local superstition, but a seed of unease had been planted, taking root in the fertile soil of his imagination. The next morning dawned gray and foreboding. Harker boarded a carriage bound for the Borgo Pass, his stomach churning with a mixture of excitement and trepidation. The driver, a grizzled man with eyes that had seen too much, cast nervous glances at the lengthening shadows. "Evil spirits roam these woods when darkness falls," he growled, his words hanging in the air like a curse. As they neared the pass, the forest seemed to close in around them, the trees looming larger with each turn of the wheels. Their branches reached out like gnarled fingers, scraping against the carriage windows with an eerie screech. The air grew thick with mist, obscuring the path ahead and muffling the sounds of the forest. Suddenly, a bone-chilling howl pierced the air, followed by another and another. Wolves emerged from the undergrowth, their eyes gleaming with hunger and something else. Something almost human in its malevolence. Harker's breath caught in his throat as the pack surrounded the carriage, their low growls a symphony of impending doom. Just as all seemed lost, the driver stood up, his face a mask of grim determination. He shouted words in a language Harker didn't understand, his voice carrying an authority that seemed to resonate with the very earth beneath them. To Harker's amazement, the wolves retreated into the shadows as if commanded by an unseen force, leaving behind only the echo of their howls. As the clock struck midnight, a black carriage materialized from the mist, its arrival heralded only by the snorting of coal-black horses with eyes that glowed an unnatural red. Harker's luggage was transferred with an efficiency that bordered on the supernatural, and he found himself whisked away into the night. The journey that followed defied all logic and reason. The carriage moved at impossible speeds, the landscape blurring into a dizzying whirl of shadows and mist. Blue flames danced in the forest, flickering like will-o'-the-wisps, leading them deeper into the unknown. Harker's mind reeled, unable to reconcile the impossible sights before him with the world he thought he knew. Finally, the carriage came to an abrupt halt before a towering castle that seemed to grow out of the very mountain itself. Its spires reached toward the sky like accusing fingers, while its walls loomed dark and forbidding. As Harker stepped out on shaky legs, a tall figure emerged from the shadows, moving with a grace that seemed almost inhuman. Count Dracula stood before him, a striking and unsettling presence. His face was pale as moonlight, with sharp, aquiline features that spoke of noble lineage, but there was something off about his appearance. Pointed ears that seemed too pronounced, teeth that glinted a little too sharply in the dim light. His eyes, dark and fathomless, seemed to bore into Harker's very soul. "Welcome to my home," the Count said, his voice rich and cultured, yet with an underlying chill that made Harker's skin crawl. "Enter freely and of your own will." As Harker crossed the threshold, a chill ran down his spine. The castle was eerily quiet, devoid of the usual bustle of servants. His eyes darted around, searching for a familiar comfort, but found none. Not even a mirror to catch his own reflection and reassure him of his sanity. With each step deeper into the castle, Harker couldn't shake the feeling that he had stepped into another world entirely, one where the rules he knew no longer applied. The air grew colder, the shadows deeper, and the silence more oppressive. And as the heavy doors closed behind him with a resounding thud, he realized that his journey had only just begun. Little did Jonathan Harker know that this seemingly routine business trip was about to spiral into a living nightmare, one that would test the very limits of his sanity and challenge everything he thought he knew about the world. Jonathan Harker's stay at Castle Dracula took a sinister turn. What began as a business trip quickly spiraled into a living nightmare. The ancient stone walls that once seemed grand now felt suffocating. Harker's footsteps echoed through empty corridors, each sound amplifying his growing sense of isolation. The air hung heavy with the musty scent of decay, a constant reminder of the castle's age and the secrets it held. As days blurred into nights, Harker witnessed events that shattered his understanding of reality. One evening, as the moon cast long shadows across the courtyard, he saw Count Dracula scale the sheer castle walls. The Count moved with inhuman agility, his fingers finding impossible purchase on the smooth stone. Harker's heart pounded in his chest, his breath catching in his throat as he watched the unnatural display. Later, from a high window, Harker observed the Count commanding a pack of wolves with mere gestures. The beast's eyes glowed in the darkness, their howls a chilling chorus that echoed through the mountains. Harker's mind reeled, unable to reconcile the power he was witnessing with anything in his rational world. Driven by a desperate need for answers, Harker explored the vast castle. Each room was a treasure trove of ancient artifacts, their value beyond measure. Gold glinted in the dim light, jewels sparkled from ornate cases, but modern comforts were conspicuously absent. No mirrors adorned the walls, no photographs captured moments in time. The deeper Harker ventured, the more his unease grew. Locked doors barred his way, their heavy wood unyielding to his efforts. Whispers of forbidden areas danced at the edge of his hearing, fueling his mounting paranoia. Was it the wind whistling through cracks in the masonry, or something more sinister? One fateful night, as Harker's nerves frayed like old rope, he encountered a trio of stunningly beautiful women. Their ethereal beauty was otherworldly, their skin pale as moonlight, their eyes burning with an unnatural hunger. As they approached, the air around them seemed to shimmer, distorting reality itself. Harker found himself paralyzed, caught between desire and terror. Their cold hands caressed his skin, their sweet breath on his neck. As sharp fangs grazed his throat, a primal fear surged through him, but his body refused to respond. Suddenly, Dracula burst into the room like a thunderclap, his voice a low growl that seemed to shake the very foundations of the castle, claimed Harker as his own prey. The women retreated, hissing in disappointment, their beautiful faces twisting into masks of fury. But their hunger was soon sated. Dracula presented them with a squirming sack from which emerged the heart-wrenching wails of an infant. The sound cut through Harker like a knife, his stomach churning with horror and revulsion. Harker's world shattered. The full weight of his situation crashed down upon him like an avalanche. With shaking hands and wild eyes, he scoured the castle for any means of escape. Every window was barred, every door locked tight as a tomb. In his feverish search, he overheard fragments of Dracula's plans, whispers of a journey to England that chilled Harker to his very marrow. As the days blurred together, Harker's journal entries became increasingly frantic. His normally neat handwriting degenerated into a chaotic scrawl, the pages stained with ink and sweat. He documented Dracula's inhuman behaviors with a mix of fascination and revulsion. The Count's habit of sleeping in a coffin filled with earth, like some grotesque parody of a bed, haunted Harker's dreams. The absence of Dracula's reflection in mirrors seemed to mock the very laws of nature. With each passing hour, Harker's desperation mounted. The looming specter of Dracula's departure filled him with dread, not just for himself, but for his unsuspecting homeland. Dark thoughts crept into his mind like poisonous tendrils. Would death by his own hand be preferable to the cursed existence of a vampire? In a last desperate gambit, Harker steeled his nerves and attempted a daring escape. His heart pounding like a war drum, he began to climb down the treacherous castle walls. Each handhold was a small victory, each foot of progress a spark of hope. The rough stone bit into his fingers, drawing blood. But he pressed on, driven by the primal need for freedom. But as he neared the ground, that hope was cruelly extinguished. Dracula's supernatural powers manifested once more, and Harker found himself thwarted, his bid for freedom crushed as surely as if the Count's icy fingers were wrapped around his throat. As Harker was dragged back into the castle, his mind reeling with despair, he caught a glimpse of activity in the courtyard below. Boxes were being loaded onto a carriage, their contents a mystery that filled him with dread. The Count's journey to England was imminent, and Harker was powerless to stop it. The last thing Harker saw before being thrust back into his prison was the Transylvanian mountains fading into the distance, their jagged peaks disappearing into the mist. As consciousness slipped away, his thoughts turned to the unsuspecting souls across the sea, blissfully unaware of the ancient evil that was about to darken their shores. The Transylvanian mountains faded into the distance, their jagged peaks disappearing into the mist. The narrative now shifted to the foggy shores of England, where two young women were about to be ensnared in the web of an ancient evil. Mina Murray sat at her desk, the scratching of her pen against paper the only sound in the room. The worry etched on her face deepened with each word she wrote in her diary. The silence from her fiancé, Jonathan, hung heavy in the air, a weight pressing down on her chest. She paused, her pen hovering over the page, as if willing the words to conjure him back to her. "Oh, Jonathan," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Where are you?" As Mina poured her heart onto the pages, her dear friend Lucy Westenra found herself swept up in a whirlwind of romance. In a single day, 3 men had laid their hearts at her feet, each offering a different future. Arthur Holmwood, with his aristocratic charm, promised a life of luxury and devotion. His blue eyes sparkled as he spoke of grand estates and lavish parties, painting a picture of a life Lucy had only dreamed of. Quincy Morris, the American adventurer, brought with him the scent of far-off lands and the promise of excitement. His laugh was as bold as his tales, filling the room with an infectious energy that made Lucy's heart race. Dr. John Seward, in contrast, offered a quieter, more steadfast love. His gentle eyes spoke of unwavering support and companionship, a rock in the stormy seas of life. Lucy's heart, torn between these 3 paths, ultimately chose Arthur. Yet in a testament to her kind nature, she maintained genuine friendships with all 3 men, unaware of the crucial roles they would soon play in her life. As summer unfurled its warm embrace, Mina and Lucy embarked on a seaside holiday in Whitby. The coastal town seemed plucked from the pages of a gothic novel, with its winding cobblestone streets and the haunting silhouette of the abbey ruins looming over all. The salty air carried whispers of ancient legends, and the cry of seagulls echoed off the weathered cliffs. But beneath the charming exterior, a darkness was stirring, seeping into the very stones of the town. One tempestuous night, as wind howled like a banshee and waves crashed against the cliffs with thunderous force, a ghostly ship emerged from the gloom. The Demeter, battered and listing heavily, ran aground on the beach with a sickening crunch of splintering wood. The townspeople, drawn by morbid curiosity, swarmed the beach. The sand, cold and damp beneath their feet, seemed to pull at their steps, as if warning them away. But still they pressed on, their lanterns casting eerie shadows across the wreckage. What they found aboard chilled them to the bone. The captain's skeletal hand, bleached white by sun and sea, still clutched the ship's log in a death grip. The pages told a harrowing tale of a doomed voyage, crew members vanishing one by one, as if plucked from the deck by an unseen predator. As the last echoes of the storm faded, a large dog leapt from the wreckage. Its eyes glowed with an unnatural light as it disappeared into the shadowy streets of Whitby. leaving behind a trail of wet paw prints that seemed to steam in the cool night air. In the days that followed, an unsettling fog seemed to settle over the town, both literal and metaphorical. Lucy, always a restless sleeper, began sleepwalking with alarming frequency. Mina would often wake to find her friend's bed empty, the curtains billowing like ghostly figures in the night breeze. More than once, she discovered Lucy wandering near the old graveyard, her white nightgown ghostly in the moonlight, her eyes vacant and unseeing. The sight sent shivers down Mina's spine, a primal fear taking root in her heart. Whispers began to circulate among the townspeople. Children spoke in hushed tones of a mysterious bloofer lady who lured them from their beds. Parents clutched their little ones closer, eyeing the shadows with suspicion, as if expecting some monster to leap out at any moment. Even the animals seemed to sense the creeping dread. At the nearby zoo, the beasts grew restless, pacing their cages and howling at unseen terrors. The air itself felt charged, as if the very town held its breath in anticipation of some terrible revelation. As Mina penned her observations in her diary, her hand trembling slightly, she couldn't shake the feeling that these strange occurrences were somehow connected. The missing Jonathan, the ill-fated Demeter, Lucy's nocturnal wanderings, all seemed like pieces of a dark puzzle, one whose solution she both dreaded and longed to uncover. Little did Mina know that these incidents were merely the opening notes in a symphony of terror. Count Dracula, cloaked in shadows and ancient power, had set foot on English soil. His presence, like a poisonous mist, was already seeping into the fabric of their lives, forever altering the course of their destinies. As the chapter drew to a close, a chill wind swept through Whitby, carrying with it the scent of decay and the promise of horrors yet to come. Mina, sitting by Lucy's bedside, noticed with growing alarm the pallor creeping into her friend's cheeks. Lucy's breath came in shallow gasps, her skin cool to the touch. Something was terribly wrong, and as the first light of dawn broke over the horizon, Mina couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning of their nightmare. Lucy Westenra's health began to deteriorate in ways that defied explanation. Her once vibrant demeanor faded, replaced by a ghostly pallor that seemed to drain the very essence of life from her cheeks. As autumn's chill crept into Whitby, Lucy's condition worsened with each passing day. The nights became a torment, filled with an increasing number of sleepwalking episodes. She would wander the halls of her home like a restless spirit, her nightgown billowing behind her in the drafty corridors. During the day, she moved as if in a trance, her steps weak and unsteady, barely able to support her increasingly frail frame. The sparkle that once danced in her eyes dimmed, replaced by a haunted, faraway look that sent shivers down the spines of those who loved her. Arthur Holmwood, Lucy's devoted fiancé, watched helplessly as his beloved withered before his eyes. The weight of his worry seemed to age him, etching lines of concern on his youthful face. One evening, as the setting sun cast long shadows across Lucy's sick room, Arthur turned to his friend, Dr. John Seward, his voice cracking with emotion. "John, I fear we're losing her. Can you help?" The desperation in Arthur's plea hung heavy in the air, mingling with the sickly sweet scent of wilting flowers by Lucy's bedside. Dr. Seward, a man who prided himself on his scientific mind and rational approach, found himself utterly baffled by Lucy's symptoms. He examined her thoroughly, his brow furrowed in concentration, his fingers gentle as they probed for answers that remained frustratingly out of reach. Frustrated by his inability to diagnose her condition, Seward made a decision that would alter the course of events. "I know someone who might be able to help," he said, his voice tinged with equal parts hope and desperation. "My old mentor, Professor Abraham Van Helsing. If anyone can solve this mystery, it's him." Van Helsing arrived in Whitby like a force of nature, his presence filling the room as he examined Lucy. His keen eyes took in every detail, from the pallor of her skin to the faint flutter of her pulse. As he observed the telltale signs, a shadow of recognition passed over his face, quickly masked by a professional demeanor that betrayed nothing of his inner thoughts. "We must act quickly," Van Helsing declared, his Dutch accent thick with urgency. He set about implementing treatments that seemed bizarre to the others. Filling Lucy's room with the pungent aroma of garlic flowers, and fashioning a necklace of garlic cloves for her to wear. "But why, Professor?" Dr. Seward asked, perplexed by these unconventional methods. The sharp scent of garlic overwhelmed the sick room, a stark contrast to the delicate perfumes Lucy once favored. Van Helsing's eyes glinted with a knowledge he wasn't ready to share. "Trust me, my friend, there are more things in heaven and earth than are dreamt of in your philosophy." His words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken implications. Despite these precautions, Lucy's condition continued its relentless decline. Her health became a cruel roller coaster. Moments of apparent recovery that lifted everyone's spirits, followed by crushing relapses that left her weaker than before. It was as if some unseen force was draining her life force, leaving behind only a shell of the vivacious young woman she once was. Dr. Seward, ever the meticulous observer, noticed small puncture marks on Lucy's neck during one of his examinations. He traced the marks with his finger, a fleeting thought of their significance crossing his mind before he dismissed it. Focusing instead on more rational explanations for her condition, the marks barely visible against her pale skin seemed to mock his scientific understanding. As Lucy's illness progressed, a new terror gripped the town of Whitby. Whispers of children being attacked by a mysterious figure known as the Bloofer Lady spread like wildfire. Parents clutched their little ones close, eyeing the shadows with suspicion. The connection between these attacks and Lucy's condition remained hidden, a dark thread in the tapestry of unfolding events. Through it all, Mina remained a steadfast presence at Lucy's side. Her face etched with concern, she tended to her friend with unwavering devotion. In the quiet moments between Lucy's fitful bouts of sleep, Mina would sit by the window, pen in hand, meticulously documenting every strange occurrence in her journal. Each scratch of her pen on paper seemed to echo the growing sense of unease that permeated the very air around them. As night fell and shadows lengthened, Mina looked up from her writing, her eyes drawn to Lucy's pale form on the bed. The room was thick with the scent of garlic and the weight of unspoken fears. Mina's hand trembled slightly as she made her final entry for the day, her words a testament to the strange and terrifying journey they had all embarked upon. The clock struck midnight, its chimes echoing through the silent house. Suddenly, Lucy's eyes flew open, her gaze unfocused and wild. She sat up in bed, her movements jerky and unnatural. As Mina rushed to her side, Lucy turned to her, her voice a raspy whisper that sent chills down Mina's spine. "He's coming!" Lucy hissed, her eyes now fixed on the window. "He's coming for me!" Before Mina could react, Lucy collapsed back onto the bed, unconscious once more. Outside, a bat's wings fluttered against the window pane, a dark harbinger of the battle that was about to unfold. Professor Van Helsing takes charge of Lucy's treatment with unwavering resolve. His eyes gleam with determination as he prepares to initiate a series of desperate measures to combat her worsening anemia. The air in Lucy's bedroom is thick with tension, heavy with the scent of fear and hope intermingled. Lucy's suitors, Arthur Holmwood, Quincy Morris, and Dr. Seward, huddle around her bedside, their faces etched with worry. The soft rustle of fabric fills the room as they roll up their sleeves one by one, offering their blood to save the woman they all adore. Van Helsing's weathered hands move with practiced precision as he prepares for the transfusions. The sharp smell of antiseptic cuts through the air, a stark reminder of the gravity of the situation. As the needle pierces skin, a collective breath is held, as if the very act of exhaling might shatter this fragile attempt at salvation. Despite their valiant efforts, Lucy's condition deteriorates like sand slipping through an hourglass. Van Helsing's brow furrows in concentration, his mind racing through every trick in his arsenal. The pungent aroma of garlic flowers fills the air as he strategically places them around Lucy's room. A crucifix, cool and heavy, rests on her chest, rising and falling with each labored breath. But fate, it seems, has other plans. A series of unfortunate events unfolds like a cruel domino effect. Lucy's mother, her eyes clouded with misguided concern, removes the garlic and crucifix. The room, once a fortress against evil, now lies vulnerable. In the shadows, unseen eyes gleam with malicious triumph. On a night when the wind howls like a mournful spirit, disaster strikes. The sound of shattering glass pierces the air as a wolf, its fur as dark as sin, crashes through the window of the Westenra house. Shards rain down like deadly diamonds, glinting in the moonlight. Lucy's mother, her heart unable to bear the shock, collapses with a thud that echoes through the house. In the chaos that follows, Lucy is left unprotected, a lamb among wolves. From this moment, Lucy's decline accelerates at a terrifying pace. Van Helsing's face grows haggard with exhaustion as he attempts more aggressive treatments. But it's like trying to hold back a tidal wave with bare hands. Lucy's transformation progresses relentlessly, each day bringing her closer to something inhuman. Her once gentle features sharpen, canine teeth elongating into deadly points. Her demeanor shifts, a seductive aggression replacing her former sweetness. It's as if a stranger wears Lucy's skin, her true self trapped behind eyes that burn with an otherworldly hunger. In a heart-wrenching moment that shatters hopes, Lucy experiences a brief flash of clarity. It's like watching a candle flicker one last time before being snuffed out. Her eyes, suddenly clear and filled with the Lucy they all knew, fix on Arthur. Her voice, weak but urgent, pleads, "Arthur, please, kiss me." The room holds its breath as Arthur leans in, his lips trembling as they meet Lucy's. It's a bittersweet farewell, a final thread connecting Lucy to her humanity before it's severed forever. The air grows heavy with unspoken goodbyes and shattered dreams. Shortly after, Lucy dies. But Van Helsing knows with a certainty that chills him to the bone that this is not the end. Death in this case is merely a doorway to something far more sinister. The silence that follows Lucy's last breath is deafening, filled with unspoken horrors yet to come. With grim determination, Van Helsing insists on guarding Lucy's body. He places garlic in her coffin, his actions bewildering and upsetting the mourners. They cannot understand, their grief-stricken minds unable to grasp the horror that Van Helsing sees looming on the horizon. In the days following Lucy's burial, whispers begin to circulate. Children speak in hushed tones of a bloofer lady who stalks the night. Parents clutch their little ones close, eyeing the shadows with newfound fear. The very air seems to thicken with dread, as if the town itself can sense the evil that has taken root. It's then that Van Helsing knows the time has come. With a heavy heart, he gathers Dr. Seward and the others. The truth he's about to reveal will shatter their world, but it cannot be delayed any longer. In a voice laden with the weight of terrible knowledge, Van Helsing begins to explain the dark reality of vampires and the fate that has befallen their beloved Lucy. As night falls, Van Helsing leads the group towards Lucy's tomb. The graveyard looms before them, a sea of stone markers bathed in moonlight. The professor's face is set in grim determination as he approaches the entrance to Lucy's final resting place. Behind him, Arthur, Quincy, and Dr. Seward exchanged nervous glances, their hearts pounding with a mixture of dread and disbelief. What horrors await them beyond that cold stone door? The answer lies just moments away, as Van Helsing reaches for the handle, ready to confront the unthinkable. Van Helsing stood at the entrance of Lucy's tomb, his face etched with grim determination. He had gathered Arthur Holmwood, Quincy Morris, and Dr. Seward for a task that would challenge their very understanding of reality. The night air hung heavy, thick with an oppressive silence that seemed to smother even the faintest whisper. Moonlight filtered through wispy clouds, casting an eerie glow on the weathered tombstones surrounding them. The men's breath came out in visible puffs, a reminder of the unseasonable chill that had settled over the cemetery. As they positioned themselves near the crypt, shadows danced in the flickering lamplight, twisting and writhing like tortured souls. Time stretched like taffy, each second an eternity of anticipation. The men's hearts thundered in their chests, a primal drumbeat of fear and dread. Suddenly, a soft scraping sound shattered the silence. It was barely audible, yet it echoed in their minds like a thunderclap. Lucy emerged from her tomb, a vision that would haunt their nightmares for years to come. Her once angelic features were now a mask of otherworldly hunger, her eyes gleaming with an unholy light. In her arms, she cradled a small child, its tiny form as limp and pale as a discarded doll. The sight hit the men like a physical blow. Dr. Seward felt bile rise in his throat, while Quincy's hand instinctively tightened on his knife. Arthur stood frozen, his face a canvas of conflicting emotions. Love, horror, disbelief, and a desperate, aching sorrow. Lucy's gaze locked onto Arthur, her lips curling into a seductive smile that was both alluring and terrifying. "Come to me, Arthur," she purred, her voice a haunting melody that seemed to bypass their ears and resonate directly in their minds. "Let me show you pleasures beyond your wildest dreams." Arthur took a hesitant step forward, drawn by some primal urge he couldn't explain. His eyes were glazed, his movements jerky like a puppet on strings. Van Helsing's hand shot out, gripping Arthur's arm with surprising strength. The professor's touch seemed to break the spell, and Arthur blinked rapidly, confusion and shame washing over his features. In one fluid motion, Van Helsing thrust a crucifix between Lucy and the mesmerized men. The effect was instantaneous and horrifying. Lucy recoiled, her beautiful face contorting into a snarl that revealed sharp fangs where pearly teeth once resided. She hissed like a cornered animal, the sound more feline than human. With inhuman speed, she retreated to her coffin, leaving the men shaken and gasping for breath. Van Helsing's accented voice cut through the stunned silence. "Now you see the truth of our enemy," he said, his words heavy with emotion and grim resolve. "We must act swiftly to free Lucy's soul from this unholy curse." The professor explained the grim task that lay ahead, his words painting a vivid picture of the ritual required to destroy a vampire. Each man felt the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders, a burden as heavy as the stakes they now carried. The wood felt rough and alien in their hands, a stark reminder of the violence they were about to commit. Arthur's hand trembled as he positioned the wooden stake over Lucy's chest. Tears streamed down his face, leaving glistening trails in the moonlight. His grief was palpable, a living thing that seemed to fill the crypt with its raw intensity. "Be strong, friend Arthur," Quincy murmured, his Texas drawl a comforting anchor in the sea of horror surrounding them. He placed a steadying hand on Arthur's shoulder, offering silent support. With a cry that seemed to echo through time itself, Arthur drove the stake home. The sound of wood-piercing flesh was sickeningly wet, followed by Lucy's screams, a terrible symphony of pain and rage that would haunt their dreams for years to come. Her body convulsed, thrashing with inhuman strength. The men watched, their faces masks of anguish, as the creature that was once Lucy writhed and thrashed. An eternity seemed to pass before Lucy's form finally stilled. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the ragged breathing of the men who had witnessed this terrible act. The air in the crypt felt thick and oppressive, heavy with the scent of blood and something older, more primal. Van Helsing moved forward, his face set in grim determination. With practiced movements, he completed the ritual, severing Lucy's head and filling her mouth with pungent garlic. As he worked, a sense of peace seemed to settle over the crypt, as if Lucy's soul had finally found release. The men could almost imagine her spirit, free and pure once more, rising from her desecrated body. The group stood in silence, each man lost in his own thoughts. The weight of what they had witnessed and done pressed down upon them, forging an unbreakable bond between them. They had crossed a line tonight, stepped into a world of darkness and horror that they could never fully leave behind. As dawn broke, painting the sky in hues of pink and gold, the men emerged from the tomb. Their eyes met, a silent understanding passing between them. They had glimpsed the face of true evil, and now they knew their purpose. "We must stop Dracula," Dr. Seward said, his voice hoarse but determined. "We cannot allow this tragedy to befall anyone else." The others nodded, their resolve hardening. As they walked away from Lucy's final resting place, they were no longer just individuals, but a team united in a sacred mission. The hunt for Dracula had begun, and they would not rest until the vampire was destroyed and the world was safe from his unholy influence. Yet as they left the cemetery, a chill wind picked up, carrying with it a whisper that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "Mina," it hissed, a sound so faint they might have imagined it, but the dread that settled in their hearts told them otherwise. Their victory over Lucy suddenly felt hollow, for they knew the true battle was only just beginning. Lucy's destruction had brought a somber victory to the group. However, their relief was short-lived as Dracula, the relentless vampire, now turned his malevolent attention to Mina Murray, who had recently become Mina Harker after her marriage to Jonathan. The air hung heavy with an unseen menace, as if the very night itself conspired with the vampire's dark designs. Jonathan, having miraculously escaped the clutches of Castle Dracula, had returned to England with harrowing tales that chilled the blood. His eyes, once bright with adventure, now held a haunted look that spoke volumes of the horrors he had witnessed. Seeking solace and protection, Mina had taken up residence at Dr. Seward's asylum. The irony was cruel. She had unknowingly placed herself in the shadow of Dracula's Carfax estate. The asylum's stone walls, once a symbol of safety, now seemed to trap the growing dread within. As darkness fell each evening, an eerie stillness settled over the grounds. The rustling of leaves sounded like whispered warnings, and the shadows seemed to stretch their fingers towards Mina's window. It was under this cover of night that Dracula began his insidious assault. Like a phantom, he slipped into her room, his presence as cold and invasive as the grave. The air temperature dropped sharply, and the faint scent of damp earth filled the space. Night after night, he fed on her blood, each visit leaving Mina more drained than the last. The vibrant young woman began to wither like a flower deprived of sunlight, her skin taking on an ashen pallor, her eyes losing their luster. The group of friends and allies, now including the battle-worn Jonathan Harker, noticed the alarming change in Mina. The same fatigue and weakness that had heralded Lucy's descent into vampirism now marked Mina's features. A sense of dread settled over them like a heavy shroud, their hearts sinking with the weight of their failure to protect her. Determined to shield Mina from further harm, they fortified the asylum with every precaution they could muster. The pungent scent of garlic festooned the windows, its aroma a constant reminder of the danger lurking outside. Crucifixes adorned the walls, their presence both comforting and ominous. Watchful eyes maintained a constant vigil, fighting against the pull of sleep. Yet Dracula's powers proved to be as formidable as they were terrifying. He commanded the very elements, bending them to his will. Storms lashed against the asylum windows, rain pelting the glass like 1,000 tiny fists, providing cover for his approach. Rats scurried through impossibly small cracks, their beady eyes serving as Dracula's spies, their tiny claws scratching a sinister rhythm in the walls. Even the gentle mist became a sinister ally, allowing the vampire to seep through the tiniest openings like a malevolent fog. In the dead of night, when even the most vigilant eyes grew heavy, Dracula struck. He materialized in Mina's room, his presence a palpable chill that froze the air. With a mere glance, he ensnared Mina's mind, silencing any cry for help that might have escaped her lips. The poor woman lay helpless, a lamb before a wolf, as Dracula approached with predatory grace. What followed was a scene of unspeakable horror. Dracula, his eyes gleaming with unholy hunger, attacked Mina with savage ferocity. The sound of his feeding was a terrible wet noise that seemed to echo in the stillness of the night. But he did not stop at merely drinking her blood. In a twisted mockery of intimacy, he forced Mina to drink from him, creating a blood bond that went beyond the physical, a psychic link that would bind them across time and space. The group discovered Mina in this compromised state, her nightgown stained crimson, her eyes wide with terror and confusion. The sight struck them like a physical blow, the reality of their failure to protect her sinking in like a dagger to the heart. They gathered around her, their faces etched with a mixture of horror, guilt, and grim determination. As dawn broke, casting its pale light over the asylum grounds, the group huddled together, their voices low but resolute. They understood now with crystal clarity the urgency of their mission. Every moment that passed brought Mina closer to a fate worse than death, transformation into one of the undead. With renewed vigor, they vowed to protect Mina and to use every scrap of knowledge, every resource at their disposal to hunt down Dracula. The race against time had begun, and the stakes could not have been higher. As they looked at Mina, still trembling from her ordeal, they knew that failure was not an option. They would destroy Dracula or die trying. As the first rays of sunlight crept across the room, a sudden chill swept through the air. The group tensed, their eyes darting to the windows. There, etched in the frost on the glass, was a message that made their blood run cold. "She is mine now." The hunt for Dracula was about to begin in earnest. But would they be too late to save Mina from her terrible fate? The group had grown, now including Jonathan Harker in their ranks. With renewed determination, they gathered to begin their hunt for Dracula in earnest. The room was dimly lit, shadows dancing on the walls like restless spirits. A single candle flickered on the table, its flame wavering with each breath, as if it too felt the weight of their task. The air hung heavy with the scent of old books and fear, a palpable tension that seemed to press down on their shoulders. Mina's fingers trembled slightly as she spread her meticulously kept notes across the worn wooden surface. Van Helsing's eyes gleamed with a mix of excitement and dread as he pored over ancient texts, his weathered hands tracing the lines of arcane knowledge. Jonathan sat quietly, his face a mask of grim determination, the horrors he had witnessed in Transylvania etched into the lines around his eyes. As they pooled their knowledge, a chilling realization dawned on them. Dracula had been busy, weaving a web of safety across London. "He's hidden boxes of his native earth throughout the city," Van Helsing explained, his accent thickening with urgency. "These are not mere soil, my friends. They are his lifelines, his sanctuaries from the sun." A collective shudder ran through the group. The enormity of their task suddenly became clear. They weren't just hunting a monster. They were dismantling an intricate network of evil that had taken root in their beloved city. With hushed voices, as if afraid the very walls might be listening, they formulated a plan. The streets of London, once familiar and comforting, now seemed alien and threatening. Every shadow held the potential for danger, every alley a possible ambush. The gentle patter of rain against the windows took on a sinister rhythm, like the tapping of unseen claws. They split into smaller groups, their footsteps echoing on the cobblestones as they ventured into the night. Jonathan's knowledge of Dracula's real estate transactions proved invaluable, guiding them through a labyrinth of properties the vampire had acquired. Each step felt like a descent into darkness, the weight of their mission pressing down on them like a physical force. Their search was far from easy. Dracula's supernatural defenses were formidable, and his minions lurked in the most unexpected places. The scurrying of rats in dark corners took on a new, terrifying meaning. "He controls them," Van Helsing whispered, his face pale in the moonlight. "They are his eyes and ears." Despite the risks, they pressed on. Each box of earth they uncovered and destroyed felt like a small victory in their grueling war against the darkness. The Carfax estate, once Dracula's stronghold, became the site of their greatest triumph yet. As they set fire to the boxes hidden there, the flames licked at the night sky, and for a moment they could almost imagine they heard a distant, inhuman howl of rage and pain. Their efforts were taking their toll on Dracula. Like a cornered animal, he became increasingly desperate and aggressive. They could feel his malevolent presence growing stronger, his attacks more frequent and vicious. Yet they refused to back down, drawing strength from each other and their shared purpose. As they closed in on the remaining boxes, the air grew heavy with anticipation. They knew that Dracula would not go down without a fight, that the most dangerous part of their quest was yet to come. But as they looked at each other, their faces etched with determination and their eyes burning with resolve, they knew that together they stood a chance against even the darkest of evils. Little did they know, as they returned to their base of operations, exhausted but triumphant, that Dracula had made a move of his own. In the shadows of the night, he had forged a connection that would change everything. As Mina slept fitfully, plagued by nightmares she couldn't quite remember, a psychic link was forming, binding her to the very monster they sought to destroy. The true battle was only just beginning. Dracula had forged a blood bond with Mina, an act that would have far-reaching consequences. This unholy connection established a psychic link between them, intertwining their minds in ways neither could have foreseen. The air in the dimly lit room felt thick with tension, heavy with the weight of unspoken fears. Shadows danced on the walls, cast by the flickering candlelight that struggled to push back the encroaching darkness. In this somber setting, Professor Van Helsing's eyes suddenly widened with a spark of realization. He leaned forward, his weathered hands gently clasping Mina's trembling fingers. The touch was warm, reassuring, a stark contrast to the chill that had settled in her bones. "My dear," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, yet carrying the gravity of his revelation, "I believe we may have stumbled upon a powerful tool in our fight against the Count." Mina's brow furrowed, her eyes a battleground where fear and curiosity waged war. "What do you mean, Professor?" Her voice quavered, betraying the turmoil within. As Van Helsing explained his theory about Mina's ability to glimpse into Dracula's thoughts when hypnotized, the room fell into a silence so profound it seemed to swallow even the sound of their breathing. The revelation settled over them like a heavy fog, obscuring the path ahead while simultaneously illuminating a new terrifying possibility. In the days that followed, Mina bravely submitted herself to regular hypnosis sessions. Each time she would slip into a trance-like state, her face a canvas of conflicting emotions. Fear, concentration, and something else. Something alien. As she spoke, her voice took on an otherworldly quality, describing Dracula's movements and plans in vivid, chilling detail. The group hung on her every word, pens scratching furiously against paper, meaningful glances exchanged in the moments between revelations. This psychic link had become their most valuable asset, a beacon of hope in their relentless pursuit of the vampire. But as with all things touched by Dracula's influence, this connection exacted a terrible price. Mina would often wake from these sessions drenched in cold sweat, her nightgown clinging to her trembling form. Her eyes, wild with terror, would dart around the room as if searching for an unseen threat. "He's there," she would whisper, her voice raw with fear as she clutched at her head. "I can feel him, trying to get in." The realization that the link worked both ways sent a collective shudder through the group. The possibility that Dracula could potentially influence Mina's thoughts, perhaps even control her actions, hung over them like a sword of Damocles. The stakes of their mission suddenly became painfully personal. Mina's very soul hung in the balance. Time seemed to slip away like sand through an hourglass, each grain a moment lost in their race against the vampire's growing influence. With each passing day, the urgency of their quest intensified. They could see the subtle changes in Mina, the pallor of her skin, now as white as fresh snow, the haunted look in her eyes that spoke of battles fought in the dark recesses of her mind. She was fighting a war within herself, struggling against Dracula's insidious influence that threatened to consume her. In a desperate attempt to protect Mina, Van Helsing performed a sacred wafer ritual. The room filled with the heady scent of incense, curling tendrils of smoke weaving through the air like spectral fingers. The low murmur of Latin prayers created a hypnotic backdrop as Van Helsing approached Mina, wafer in hand. As the consecrated bread touched Mina's forehead, she let out a heart-wrenching cry that seemed to echo the very torment of her soul. When the ritual was complete, an angry red scar marred her skin, a physical manifestation of the spiritual battle raging within her. Mina stood before the mirror, her fingers tracing the outline of the scar. Tears welled in her eyes, glistening like diamonds in the dim light as she turned to face the group. "I feel marked," she said, her voice barely audible, a whisper of wind through autumn leaves. "Unclean." Jonathan rushed to her side, enveloping her in a protective embrace. His arms around her were like a fortress, a last line of defense against the darkness that threatened to engulf her. "You are the bravest, purest soul I know," he whispered fiercely, his words a balm to her wounded spirit. "This scar is a badge of your courage, nothing more." Despite her distress, Mina's resolve remained unshaken. She squared her shoulders, a determined glint in her eye that burned like a flame in the darkness. "We must press on," she declared, her voice gaining strength with each word. "I will not let Dracula win." As the days wore on, the team relied heavily on Mina's connection to track Dracula's movements. Through her visions, they pieced together his frantic journey back to Transylvania. It was as if they were chasing a shadow, always one step behind, their quarry slipping through their fingers like smoke. The air grew thick with tension as they realized they were hurtling towards a final confrontation. Dracula was returning to his home ground, where his power would be at its peak. The group knew they had to stop him before he reached his destination, or all might be lost. As they made their preparations, a storm began to brew on the horizon. The wind howled like a mournful spirit, whipping through trees and rattling windows. Dark clouds gathered overhead, blotting out the sun and casting the world in an eerie twilight. It was as if nature itself was setting the stage for the climactic battle to come. Mina stood at the window, her eyes fixed on the gathering darkness. The scar on her forehead seemed to pulse with an otherworldly energy, a beacon calling out to the very evil they sought to destroy. She could feel Dracula's presence growing stronger with each passing moment, a malevolent force pressing against the edges of her consciousness. Suddenly, Mina gasped, her body going rigid. Her eyes rolled back, showing only the whites as she began to speak in a voice not her own. "I am coming," she growled, the words dripping with malice. "My castle awaits, and soon you shall all be mine." As quickly as it had come, the moment passed, leaving Mina collapsed on the floor, shaking uncontrollably. The group exchanged horrified glances, the reality of their situation crashing down upon them. Dracula was on the move, and they were running out of time. The final chapter of their harrowing journey was about to unfold, and the fate of not just Mina, but perhaps the entire world hung in the balance. Dracula, the cunning vampire lord, realized his time in England was drawing to a close. With a growing sense of urgency, he fled back to his ancestral castle in Transylvania, seeking refuge within its ancient walls. The night air crackled with tension as the group of determined hunters set out in hot pursuit. Their hearts pounded with a mix of fear and resolve, each beat a reminder of the high stakes of their mission. The race against time had begun, and they knew that allowing Dracula to reach his stronghold would spell doom for humanity itself. In a strategic move, they split their forces. Van Helsing, his face etched with lines of worry, led Mina and Jonathan Harker on a grueling overland journey through the heart of Europe. The trio faced a gauntlet of challenges that tested their mettle at every turn. Hostile villagers eyed them with suspicion, their whispers carrying tales of the unholy creature that had passed through their lands. "Did you see his eyes?" one old woman hissed. "Like burning coals they were." The hunters pressed on, the weight of their mission heavy on their shoulders. Treacherous mountain passes loomed before them, their narrow paths barely clinging to sheer cliff faces. Mina's breath caught in her throat as she peered over the edge, the misty abyss below seeming to reach up with ghostly fingers. Jonathan squeezed her hand, his touch a lifeline in this perilous journey. Meanwhile, Quincy Morris, Arthur Holmwood, and Dr. Seward chose the swifter sea route. Their ship cut through choppy waters, the salty spray stinging their eyes as they scanned the horizon. The creaking of the ship's timbers and the mournful cry of seabirds created an eerie soundtrack to their pursuit. Both groups continued their relentless assault on Dracula's remaining sanctuaries. With grim determination, they sought out and destroyed the boxes of consecrated earth that sustained the vampire during his travels. Each box reduced to ashes was a small victory, the acrid smell of burning wood a reminder of their progress. But Dracula was far from helpless. As the hunters drew nearer, he unleashed the full extent of his supernatural powers. Storm clouds gathered at his command, turning day into night. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the terrified faces of the hunters for brief, heart-stopping moments. Packs of wolves emerged from the shadows, their eyes glowing with an unnatural hunger. Their howls sent shivers down the spines of the travelers, a primal fear taking root in their hearts. The very land seemed to turn against the pursuers, as if Dracula's malevolent will had seeped into the very soil of his homeland. Adding to the hunters' woes were Dracula's gypsy allies, their colorful caravans a stark contrast to the darkness they served. These nomadic people, bound to the vampire by ancient pacts and whispered promises, used their intimate knowledge of the land to aid Dracula's flight and hinder his pursuers. As the shadow of Castle Dracula loomed ever closer on the horizon, a palpable tension gripped the hunting party. They sharpened their weapons, the scrape of metal on stone, a grim reminder of the violence to come. The air grew thick with anticipation, like the calm before a great storm. For Mina, the journey took on an even more sinister aspect. With each mile that brought them closer to Transylvania, she felt Dracula's influence growing stronger within her. It was as if invisible tendrils were reaching out across the miles, tightening their grip on her soul. Her skin grew paler, her eyes taking on a haunted look that filled her companions with dread. "I can feel him," Mina whispered, her voice trembling. "He's calling to me." Van Helsing's face tightened with concern, knowing that the race was not just to stop Dracula, but to save Mina from a fate worse than death. As night fell and the first stars appeared in the sky, the hunters gathered around their campfire. The flickering flames cast long shadows that seemed to dance with a life of their own. They knew that, with each passing moment, Dracula drew closer to the sanctuary of his castle. Suddenly, a bone-chilling howl pierced the night air. The hunters leapt to their feet, weapons at the ready. In the distance, they could see a dark silhouette against the moonlit sky. Castle Dracula, looming like a monstrous sentinel. The final battle was upon them, a confrontation that would determine the fate of not just Mina, but of all humanity. As they prepared to make their final approach, a cold wind swept through their camp, extinguishing the fire and plunging them into darkness. In that moment of blindness, they heard Mina's terrified gasp, followed by the sound of rapidly retreating footsteps. When they finally managed to relight their torches, they made a chilling discovery. Mina was gone. The group converges on Castle Dracula for the final confrontation, their hearts pounding with anticipation and fear. They arrive just before sunset, knowing that time is of the essence in their quest to destroy the ancient vampire. The looming silhouette of Castle Dracula pierced the blood-red sky, a monstrous sentinel of evil that seemed to mock their approach. The air grew thick and heavy, as if the very atmosphere was trying to push them back. Each step forward felt like wading through molasses, their legs leaden with exhaustion and dread. Van Helsing's weathered face was a map of worry lines, his eyes darting constantly to the sinking sun. "We must hurry," he muttered, his Dutch accent more pronounced in his anxiety. Dracula's power grows with the night. The group clutched their weapons tightly, palms slick with sweat. The cold metal of stakes and crucifixes offered little comfort against the overwhelming sense of evil that permeated the air. Jonathan Harker's jaw was set in grim determination, his mind replaying the horrors he had witnessed within the castle walls. Beside him, Mina's face was pale but resolute, her hand occasionally brushing the scar on her forehead, a constant reminder of the vampire's touch. As they neared the castle gates, the eerie silence was shattered by the thundering of hooves. From the lengthening shadows emerged Dracula's gypsy protectors, their dark eyes glinting with fanatical loyalty. In their midst, bouncing ominously on a horse-drawn cart, was an ornate wooden box, Dracula's coffin. The sight of it sent a collective shudder through the group. Dr. Seward felt his medical bag grow heavy, filled with garlic and holy water that now seemed woefully inadequate. Arthur Holmwood's aristocratic features hardened, his hand tightening on the hilt of his sword as he remembered Lucy's fate. With a blood-curdling war cry, the two sides clashed, the air filled with the discordant symphony of battle, the clang of metal on metal, grunts of exertion, and cries of pain. Quincy Morris's Texan drawl rang out above the din. "Remember what we're fighting for, boys." Van Helsing's voice cut through the chaos. "Mina, we must go. The brides await." Grabbing her hand, they broke away from the main fight and raced towards the castle's yawning entrance. The cold, damp air inside hit them like a physical blow, carrying the musty scent of centuries-old evil. In the great hall, a nightmarish scene unfolded. The three female vampires who had once tormented Harker now floated before them, their ethereal beauty a stark contrast to the malevolence in their eyes. Van Helsing's hand trembled slightly as he raised his stake, but his voice was steady as he recited the ancient words of exorcism. One by one, the brides crumbled to dust, their agonized shrieks echoing through the castle halls. Outside, the battle raged on with increasing ferocity. Jonathan Harker fought like a man possessed, his eyes blazing with the memory of all the suffering he and Mina had endured. Each swing of his weapon was fueled by a potent mixture of fear, anger, and desperate hope. As the last rays of sunlight disappeared behind the jagged mountains, a bone-chilling wind swept across the battlefield. The lid of Dracula's coffin began to creak open, the sound cutting through the noise of battle like a knife. A pale hand emerged, grasping at the air with inhuman strength. The vampire lord was awakening, and with him came a surge of supernatural energy that threatened to overwhelm the valiant group. Time seemed to slow to a crawl. Jonathan Harker and Quincy Morris, their faces streaked with blood and grime, broke through the gypsy defense. Harker's kukri knife glinted in the fading light, a silver arc of vengeance. With a cry that held all the anguish and triumph of their long struggle, he brought it down, slashing across Dracula's exposed throat. Simultaneously, Morris lunged forward, his Bowie knife finding its mark in the vampire's heart. For a heartbeat, Dracula's eyes flew open, filled with shock and something akin to relief. Then, like a sandcastle swept away by the tide, his body crumbled to dust. A hush fell over the battlefield, the sudden silence more deafening than the clash of battle. The realization of their victory slowly dawned, but the triumph was bittersweet. As the dust settled, they saw Quincy Morris stumble and fall, mortally wounded in the final assault. The group gathered around their fallen comrade, their faces a mixture of joy and sorrow. Mina cradled Morris's head in her lap, tears streaming down her face. Van Helsing bowed his head, murmuring a prayer in Dutch. The price of victory had been high, and as they stood there, united in grief and relief, they knew that the memory of this day would stay with them forever. As night fully descended on Castle Dracula, a strange wind began to pick up. The dust that had once been the dreaded Count swirled in the air, forming shapes that seemed almost human for a split second before dissipating. The group huddled closer together, their victory suddenly feeling less certain. Was it truly over, or had they only scratched the surface of an evil far older and more powerful than they could imagine? The survivors gathered, their hearts pounding with a mixture of relief and disbelief. They stood witness to Dracula's final disintegration, marking the end of their harrowing ordeal. The air crackled with an otherworldly energy as Dracula's form crumbled to dust. The acrid smell of decay filled their nostrils, a stark reminder of the evil they had vanquished. As the last particles settled, a collective sigh escaped their lips, the tension in their bodies finally releasing. Mina's transformation was instantaneous and miraculous. The angry red scar on her forehead, a constant reminder of her connection to the vampire, faded away like morning mist. Her skin tingled, a warmth spreading through her body as if life itself was being restored. Her eyes, once clouded with fear and uncertainty, now shone with newfound hope. Jonathan clasped her hand tightly, his thumb tracing the spot where the mark had been. His touch was gentle, almost reverent, as if he feared she might disappear. Their moment of triumph was bittersweet. Quincy Morris, their brave companion, lay nearby, his life ebbing away with each labored breath. The group huddled around him, their faces etched with sorrow. The metallic scent of blood hung heavy in the air, mixing with the dust of their fallen enemy. Quincy's skin was pale, his breathing shallow. With his last ounce of strength, he managed a smile, his voice barely a whisper. "We did it, boys. We got the beast." His words hung in the air as he closed his eyes for the final time, leaving behind a legacy of courage and sacrifice. The journey back to England was a somber one. The rhythmic clacking of train wheels provided a backdrop to their swirling thoughts, each click a reminder of the distance growing between them and the horrors they'd faced. The landscape outside the window blurred, much like the line between reality and nightmare in their minds. They found solace in each other's company, sharing knowing glances and supportive touches that spoke volumes in the silence. As life slowly returned to normal, each survivor carved out their own path forward. Jonathan and Mina, bound by their shared trauma and enduring love, focused on rebuilding their life together. Their home became a sanctuary filled with warm, golden light to chase away the lingering shadows of their past. The scent of fresh flowers and baking bread replaced the memory of dank castle walls and the metallic tang of blood. Dr. Seward threw himself into his work at the asylum with renewed vigor. The screams and ravings of his patients no longer unnerved him. Instead, he saw beyond the madness to the human beneath. Late at night, when the asylum fell quiet, he would often find himself staring out the window, the moonlight casting long shadows across the grounds. In those moments, he pondered the thin veil between sanity and madness. his experiences with the supernatural giving him a unique perspective on the mysteries of the human mind. Arthur Holmwood, now Lord Godalming, shouldered his new responsibilities with a quiet dignity. The loss of his beloved Lucy and the subsequent battle against Dracula had aged him beyond his years. Lines of worry etched permanently on his face. Yet it also instilled in him a sense of purpose. He used his position and resources to secretly support those who had been touched by supernatural forces, creating a network of aid and protection. His days were filled with meetings and charity work, but in quiet moments he would touch the locket containing Lucy's portrait, a bittersweet reminder of what he had lost and what he fought to protect. 7 years passed like a dream, the horrors of their ordeal fading but never truly forgotten. On the anniversary of Quincy Morris's death, a new life entered the world. Jonathan and Mina welcomed their son, a robust boy with curious eyes and a shock of dark hair. They named him Quincy, a tribute to their fallen friend and a symbol of hope for the future. The baby's cries filled their home, drowning out the echoes of past terrors. As young Quincy grew, so did the bond between the survivors. They gathered often, their laughter and conversation a stark contrast to the terrors they had once faced together. The clinking of glasses and the aroma of good food filled the air during these reunions, creating new, joyful memories to overlay the old dark ones. Yet beneath the joy lay an unspoken vigilance, a shared understanding that darkness could still lurk in the world's shadows. When Quincy reached his 7th year, the group embarked on a pilgrimage back to Transylvania. The journey was filled with a mix of trepidation and curiosity, each mile bringing them closer to the source of their nightmares. The familiar landscape rolled by, beautiful yet tinged with memories of fear and desperation. Castle Dracula, once a looming fortress of evil, now stood in ruins. Nature slowly reclaimed its stone walls, ivy creeping up the crumbling towers. The air was thick with the scent of wild herbs and damp earth, so different from the oppressive atmosphere they remembered. As they stood before the structure, a cool breeze whispered through the trees, carrying with it the ghosts of their memories. Jonathan held Mina close, their son between them, a living testament to their survival and resilience. Dr. Seward ran his hand along the weathered stones, lost in thought, while Lord Godalming stood tall, his posture a silent defiance against the horrors they had faced. In that moment, surrounded by the remnants of their greatest fear, they found an unexpected peace. The castle, stripped of its power and mystery, was nothing more than a pile of rocks. They had faced the darkness and emerged victorious, forever changed but unbroken. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the Transylvanian landscape, the group turned away from the ruins. Their bond, forged in blood and terror, had evolved into something unbreakable. They faced the future with a mixture of hope and caution, knowing that while their battle was won, the war against darkness might never truly end. The journey back to their lodgings was filled with quiet conversation and shared memories. Young Quincy listened with wide eyes as the adults spoke of bravery and sacrifice, of love that transcended death, and of the power of human will against unspeakable evil. As they settled in for the night, a sense of closure washed over them. They had returned to the source of their nightmares and found it powerless. In the years that followed, they continued to gather, to remember, and to watch. Their experiences had shaped them into guardians of the light, ever vigilant against the encroaching darkness. And as they watched young Quincy grow, they saw in him the promise of a future where good would always triumph over evil, where love and courage would light the way through even the darkest of nights. The legacy of their battle against Dracula lived on, not in fear and nightmares, but in the strength of their bonds, in their unwavering vigilance, and in the hope they passed on to the next generation. They had faced the ultimate evil and emerged victorious, their spirits unbroken, their love for each other stronger than ever. And in that victory, they found not just an end, but a new beginning.
This book was generated using Speakter's AI voices. You can create human-like voiceovers in over 50 languages.